Hello and welcome. This is Wilrens for Create a Learning Site, the place to go deeper in your study of the Bible. So, what is the most important book in the Pentateuch, or the Torah, the first 5 books in our Bibles? Well, according to Torsten, a good friend with whom I worked in the School of Biblical Studies for many years, it is the book of Leviticus. Well, he's wrong, of course. My wife thinks it's Numbers, which is why I did an earlier issue giving 6 reasons to read Numbers. But if you ask me, it might be Genesis or Exodus. Or could it be Deuteronomy? Well, at any rate, Torsten's preference for Leviticus does show that it cannot be unimportant. Perhaps he has a point. I have to admit, this is the central book in the Pentateuch. And right in the center of this central book, in Leviticus chapter 16, we read about the Day of Atonement, or the Day of Purgation. As we'll see, that might be a better translation, the Day of Atonement or the Day of Purgation. Now, in terms of vouchsafing Israel's continuing relationship with Yahweh, this was the most important day of the year. And with this, we have already dug out 2 reasons to read this book. Reason number 1 is Leviticus is the center and heart of the Pentateuch. As Torsten points out, this book is of central importance and therefore foundational for the rest of the Bible. Reason number 2 is it is here that we read about the Day of Atonement, that special day on which all ritual impurity and iniquity were removed from the sanctuary and the people. For this reason, Day of Purification or Day of Purgation would probably be a better translation, but Day of Atonement is the established term. Together with the sacrificial system described in the first half of Leviticus, this day deals with Israel's sin, and as such, it prefigures the sacrificial death of Jesus in major ways. At the same time, it helps us to understand how the sacrificial system worked. There was more to it than bringing an animal to take your place, to die in your stead, just bringing out the seriousness of sin while also providing a way to deal with it. That was part of it, and the shedding of blood as a symbol of life functions as a powerful display of this enacted reality. But there is another side to it that is less known. By sprinkling blood, the impurity and guilt were taken from the offerer and transferred to the altar. This is clearer in the Hebrew than in most English translations. The ESV reads in Leviticus 4, "So the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin, and he shall be forgiven." But actually, it should say the priest shall make atonement or purification for him from his sin, not for his sin. Let's put in the altar now, where the animal or parts of it would be burned. the blood as the carrier of life transferred the sin from the offerer to the sanctuary and the altar in particular, thereby removing it from the offerer. This is why the blood was not applied, was not sprinkled on the one bringing the sacrifice, because it would have returned his guilt and impurity back onto him. This leads to a problem. With time, more and more sin and uncleanness accumulates in the sanctuary. This problem is solved by the Day of Atonement, described in Leviticus 16. 5 animals are involved in the procedure. First of all, there's a bull as a sin offering for the priest. Then there is a goat as a sin offering for the people. There is a second goat for Azazel, it says. It is sometimes translated as scapegoat, but more likely it's the name of a demon. And then there are 2 rams, male sheep, for a burnt offering. The first 2 animals, bull and goat, for sin offering are killed, and some of their blood is brought into the Holy of Holies by the high priest. That's the only time in the year that anyone could enter there. Okay, I know this is a sheep, but I'm going to let it double for a goat and a bull. It seems that this time the direction of the transaction is reversed. Sin and impurity are not transferred from the one bringing the sacrifice to the sanctuary and the altar, but from the sanctuary to the corpses of bull and goat. This is the crucial verse from Leviticus chapter 16. In the ESV it reads, "Thus he shall make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the people of Israel and because of their transgressions or their sins." But again, a more literal translation would clearly show that the direction this time is one of removal away from the sanctuary. Thus he shall make atonement or purification or purgation for the holy place, not because of, but from the uncleanness of the people of Israel and from their transgressions, all their sins. Since both the bull and the goat are burned outside of the camp, this goes quite a way toward solving the problem, removing sin and impurity from the people of Israel. The second goat, the one for Azazel, is needed to do more thoroughly with the moral transgressions of Israel. Through confession and the laying on of hands, these are loaded onto the animal, which is then released into the wilderness, carrying its load of sins and guilt with it. So, in other words, the sacrificial system described in the first half of Leviticus presents us with a 2-stage process of dealing with impurity and sin. In some ways, to use an irreverent analogy, it is like having a large garbage container in front of the house that gets emptied, in that case, not once a year, but once a week. Reason number 3 to read this book is that Leviticus helps us to learn the language of ritual. Oops. This actually is the wrong language. and there. That's better. Now, people from the West tend to find this language more difficult because they're so shaped by science and the Enlightenment. And ritual does not work through cause and effect in a physical or biological way. Instead, it works through analogy, parallelism, symbolism. Its effectiveness derives from the operation of God and His Spirit, not from the operation of the laws of nature. In this way, ritual enables connections on a deep level, conveying spiritual understanding and effects. It also provides a foundation of words and images and practices that make salvation intelligible. Reason number 4. Leviticus helps us to understand something foundational about God and about us as human beings. Since this comes through its teaching on ritual purity, separation, and graduated holiness, which I will explain in a moment, this overlaps with the previous point, the language of ritual. However, it is such a significant theme in the book that I think it deserves its own spot here. What we learn about God is that He is pure and holy, fearsome and awe-inspiring. What we learn about ourselves is that we are not pure or holy. The result is that we begin to fathom the immense gap that exists between humans and God. By nature, He is unapproachable. When Nadab and Abihu, two of the sons of Aaron in Leviticus 10, ignore God's instruction and do things differently, their own way, they are consumed by fire. This is one of only 2 action narratives in the whole book. The rest of Leviticus is a narrative of instruction, and it suggests that this is an important demonstration of what the book is about. God cannot easily be approached. This requires careful thought and preparation and caution. Granted, this is only half the truth about God, and by far the smaller half. The other, larger half is His loving kindness, but it is an important half. It shows in the graduated holiness, in which the dwelling place of God, where God's presence is clearly separated from the camp, and it is itself separated into 3 increasingly holy areas: the outer court, then the holy place, and then the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies. The increasing value of the materials used, lost the C there, copper and silver on the outside, gold on the inside, underline this, as thus the decreasing accessibility of these holy spaces. Only ritually pure people could enter the court of the tabernacle. only priests could go into the holy place. Only the high priest could go into the most holy place, and that only once a year. God's holiness and purity also shows in the instructions for ritual purity and uncleanness in Leviticus 11 through 15. These regulations are very much part of what makes the book so exotic, so strange for us. We may be able to sympathize with not being allowed to eat rats or vultures. What's the problem with some of the other animals? Rabbits or shrimp? Why are they forbidden? And why do some of the other things, such as menstruation or childbirth, make someone unclean? Now, these questions have been extensively debated, and there may not be a consensus. What seems unlikely is that it has to do with health and hygiene. Too many items in these chapters cannot be explained this way, since they are not unhealthy. Some have argued that these things are unclean solely because God said so. According to them, there is no other rationale. It's all about obedience. Well, in my opinion, it seems two other factors are involved. One is that many unclean things are associated with death and mortality. This includes blood and even sexual intercourse and birth, because this is the other side of mortality, the beginning of life. And none of this should be brought into contact with the immortal God and his sanctuary. The second factor is that of imperfection. This especially applies to those animals that don't quite fit the ideal, such as, well, they chew the cud but have undivided hooves, or they have divided hooves but they do not chew the cud, or they live in the water but they do not have scales. Regardless of the actual logic involved, these instructions do help us to start thinking in a different framework. Pure and impure, holy and unholy. God belongs to one, we come under the other two of these paired options. Reason 5 is Leviticus teaches us about holy living. Its central and dominating theme. Again, holy is not a category that comes naturally to us. It is not part of normal life, as the society around us understands normal. Its core meaning is separation. Setting something apart for a specific purpose. When the word describes God, it also identifies him as the one who is entirely other or different. At the same time, the word often takes on connotations of perfection, especially moral perfection. The Holiness Code, which is more or less the second half of the book, therefore includes many moral injunctions that continue to have validity. At the same time, these are mixed with others that are more difficult and ambiguous in terms of relevance and application. There's no easy answer. Which ones apply, which don't, or in what way? Just because a do or a don't is in the book of Leviticus does not necessarily mean that we ought to practice it. Nor does it necessarily mean that we ought not to practice it. Still, easy or not, these commandments are life-giving and worthy of reflection. Okay, reason number 6, Leviticus teaches us about sacred time. Now, obviously the book speaks about sacred space, the tabernacle and the Israelite camp, but it also introduces sacred time, especially in chapter 23. This is where the feasts and the Sabbath come in. The Sabbath proves that there's more to this life than work. In fact, there's more to this life than this life. And the feasts combine, on the one hand, celebration of God's provision through creation, that is the various harvests, and commemoration of the Exodus and the desert wanderings. These feasts give meaning to time and reminded Israel, and remind us today, of the higher purpose of life. Reason number 7, Leviticus shows us what God really wants. In the end, this whole setup with a tabernacle as separate sacred space, regulations to keep Israel holy and ritually pure, and a sacrificial system with a priestly system to deal with error and transgression, which would otherwise force God to terminate the relationship, are there so that he can dwell among human beings once again. So that's it. 7 reasons to read the book of Leviticus. Except one more thing. Here's an idea. Maybe you still have your vacation ahead of you. If not, surely there's a weekend coming up. How about setting some time aside to read through the book of Leviticus? And if you come up with a question, post it on the website and see if anyone has answers to help you. That's it. Hope to see you next time.